and welcome to Transforming Language Education, the vodcast series where we will talk about the future of teaching, inquiry, and advocacy in language education. I'm Jen Crawford.
And I'm Rob Philback. Please like or subscribe if you want to join us in helping to transform language education.
Hello and welcome. Today on the show, we're excited to have Francesca Ricciardelli, USC Lecturer of Italian and PhD candidate at Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, Spain. With over a decade of language teaching experience, she is going to share her expertise on multilingualism and plurilingualism, her story about translanguaging pedagogy in the Italian language classroom, and some advice to understand more languages than you have studied. This is part one of a three-part series.
In part one, we will focus on how to understand learners' multiple language proficiencies across different languages, skills, modes of language use, and context from both multilingualism and plurilingual perspectives. In part two, we're going to focus on key aspects of language transfer, language proficiencies by introducing intercomprehension among Romance languages. And then finally, in part three, we're going to focus on diverse, equitable, and inclusive translanguaging and intercomprehension, and instructional strategies to promote language proficiency gains. Hi, Francesca, and welcome to Transforming Language Education.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hi, Jen. Hi, Rob.
Hi. So let's start a little bit. You have a pretty incredible background. Maybe we could start by talking about what's your language background.
In my language background, we have obviously Italian and a dialect of the hometown where I come from that I still speak and use every day. I talk to my grandmother because she does not speak Italian, for example. Then I have years of English education and French. I'm going chronologically. I have French, I have Spanish, I have Catalan, I have a little bit of German that I have forgotten. I have Portuguese that I've never studied in school. I never taken classes in Portuguese, but I have studied it on my own for my research mostly. And then I have Latin and Asian Greek. How about yours, Jennifer? I feel like I've talked too much.
No,
already.
it's incredible. It's incredible. And I think an activity you've done with some of my students, Francesca, that was really helpful was talk about this as a Casa Vicinato, and maybe you could talk about that. But in my house of, or maybe I'll say what's in my house of languages, and then you can help talk about it. So one thing that the way you've talked about language proficiency that has changed how I think about it is, I think growing up in the US as an English dominant speaker, I've thought, okay, if I can't pass as native like fluency, then that doesn't really count as a language. It doesn't really count as a language I could actually say that I speak. But then using this metaphor of what are the various languages that include in my house or my neighborhood. I grew up speaking English, but also Spanish and Italian with my great-grandparents, and my grandparents were Spanish, but it was always something that seemed a bit out of reach until I studied those later in school. So I would say on my first floor of my house would be maybe English, and then Spanish and Portuguese, because I've worked and taught in those two languages for many, many years. But then as I'm expanding, I'm trying to add, and maybe my second floor of my house, adding Italian, and then maybe on that third floor in the roof, other languages like an indigenous language in southern Mexico called Ayuk, which is where I taught for some time at a bilingual school, Spanish Ayuk, in the state of Oaxaca. And also when I was in high school, I studied in Japan. I got a scholarship to be a high school student in Japan for some time. So I have some Japanese, and then trying to learn some other languages as well from friends or families like German or Hungarian. But those are these sort of farther reach. Yeah. But how does that relate to this, like the Casa Vicinato?
Del Vicinato. Well, the idea that it has been created with my group of research in Barcelona is that the idea of having a house that we provide students with, and the students at the very first day of class, usually kids, but I found out that it works with adults too. But they have this little house that it's empty, and you ask the students to fill out the house, the front door and the other. It's a three floors house usually. The front door and the windows, they have to put the languages that form their linguistic repertoire, and the first floor is usually the ones they're most comfortable with. So going back to my languages, I would definitely put my dialect, the dialect I speak with my grandmother, and I usually speak it with my husband home too, because the Italian we speak is not the Italian I teach. So I will put the dialect, and then I will put Italian, and then I will probably put English, because I've been living here for 8 years now, and it became part of my identity to some level. And then I will put on the second floor, I will put my Spanish. After living in Barcelona, I feel like my Spanish is stronger than my French, even if I studied French for a larger amount of years. But I'm not using my French anymore, so I probably would move my French to the third floor, and have Spanish and Catalan on my second floor, and I will put German. I will put it probably on the chimney, because it's something that I'm not using. I'm not traveling to Germany anytime soon, so I don't feel like I need to have or to use or to be able to speak and understand German, but it's still there. Every time I read something in English or I read something in German, I can understand it. So I don't feel like it's time to move it out of the house. It's still part of the house. It's just not at the closest reach, but it's still there. And probably Latin and Asian Greek will also be like in the attic, with Portuguese, that I'm trying to acquire little by little alone, reading one article at a time. And so this is the idea, not the relationship that we have as plurilingual speaker with the languages that we have.
That's fascinating. What's the dialect, Francesca, that you're talking about?
The dialect is Campobassano, because my hometown is Campobasso. And yes, my grandmother does not speak Italian proper. It's not that she doesn't speak proper Italian, but it's much easier for her to continue a conversation in her dialect, in dialect. But she understands Italian, so probably in her house, Italian and Campobassano are still on the same floor. I don't know. I should ask. How about you, Rob?
So
what's your house?
Yeah, you all have very impressive homes with lots of floors and rooms. I would say I have a single floor house with a lot of languages in the attic, in a little box, a toolbox in the attic that I kind of occasionally try to open up. I can't even say order of acquisition, but order of exposure would be obviously Spanish in middle school. My name was Pablo in that class. I still remember that. I studied abroad in Germany for a year during college. So it was an English medium study abroad experience, but I did learn enough German to be conversational. And then I would say probably my deepest experience with language was the 3 years I spent in Budapest, Hungary, and then in Transylvania region of Romania. And so that was 3 years of again, acquiring conversational Hungarian. So yeah, and then other things I'm dabbling in would be, I'd probably say every year, this is the year I'm going to learn Mandarin, because we work with a lot of Chinese speakers. And so that's something that I really need to get serious about. But I love this image of the Casa Vicinato, and that's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a way that makes all the languages available to us in a way that we don't forget that we have other languages that can help us acquire more and more languages, which is what I, in my own small way, promote.
Well, it also, the image I get too is you think of that languages as less as sort of dichotomous. You either have it or you don't,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they represent different entities and different types of interaction in your life based on where you place them and how you look at them in this house image that you're talking about.
Absolutely, yes. And yeah.
I know my students, when you taught this or when you explained this to them, found it really liberating, especially when we think about many of our students in the US speak multiple heritage languages or have different types of exposure to languages. So moving from thinking of just I speak one language or I speak two languages to this notion of plurilingualism, I thought this activity that you did with them was really helpful. Francesca, could you tell us a little bit more about what is plurilingualism?
Yes. So plurilingualism is something that it's according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. So it's maybe a little different from the definition you could have in the United States, but it's basically the ability of every learner, speaker, user of a language to acquire as many languages as possible, which means that we are, the three of us here speaking, we are plurilingual speakers or plurilingual users of languages, which is different from multilingual, and always according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the multilingualism is not personal, is not for one person, it's more for a geographic region. The United States are multilingual, whether we want it or not, are multilingual. Italy is multilingual. My husband, he's from a small village 7 kilometers far from Campobasso, and he has another dialect. So we have multiple languages, and it's just a matter of accepting all of them, whatever degree of knowledge we have of the language. So this is multilingualism. Spain is multilingual. It is every country that we can think of is multilingual. And then that's the difference. With plurilingual is the person who lives in a multilingual environment. And that's,
That's fascinating. So it's placing the emphasis on these individuals that have these different language houses and profiles, as it were. How does that help your learners if you shift their thinking from multilingualism to plurilingualism? What does that do for me as a learner or as a speaker? How does it help? Because so often we have multilingual contexts, but the multiple languages aren't valued, and the multilingual speakers or the plurilinguals aren't necessarily valued for some of the languages they speak.
Well, once the learners of the language or the users of the language know that they're plurilingual, everything shifts. What I've noticed in this country is that nobody wants to speak a language unless it's unless the person is 100% sure that it will get the communication going, which is something that to some extent we do not do in Europe. Not that we're not looking for accuracy, but we tend to maybe improvise more. We tend to try to get the communication going, even in a language class environment. It's not just touristing around. While here there's a sort of fear of saying something that is not grammatically correct. I feel like students in Europe or speakers and users in Europe do not have that fear. So maybe the idea of being plurilingual can be motivation boost for the speakers. Yeah, because sometimes there's also another terminology like polyglot. Oh, you're a polyglot. I don't like the terminology polyglot, which translate to speaker of many languages, but at the same time, who's really a polyglot? How can we define if somebody's polyglot? While plurilingual, everything is accepted, meaning also I'm a plurilingual speaker of Portuguese. I cannot speak it back, but I can understand, and I can still get the communication going. So that's what a plurilingual is, more open to. It's more open. It's easier to have plurilingual speakers.
You know, Francesca, it makes me think. After Francesca and I taught together in Italy last May, and one of the things I noticed after they spoke with Francesca about this idea of plurilingualism, was that there was a way in which they were sort of giving up on a little of the shame, like shedding a little bit of their shame about, well, what if I make a mistake in this language, or what if I'm not 100%, or I haven't reached a really high proficiency? And that's what I had mentioned earlier. It seemed kind of liberating to myself, who was always sort of judging myself on a native speaker standard, and embracing that maybe it was okay if I had partial competence in a particular language, or for my students that it was okay if they had partial competence, that the communication was most important.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely
great. I had a experience in Italy this summer where we went to visited a friend, and when we first got there, I said, I don't speak Italian, but Kathy, what's a word that only an insider would know? And we were in Tuscany, and she said, oh, let me think. And then she came up with the word gonzo, which means like, it's an explanation, like how wonderful. So a couple of days later, we went to a restaurant. The owner kindly read us the menu in English, translated it all. It was so amazing, and all of us around the table just kept going, "Oh my gosh, that sounds so good! Oh my gosh, that's wonderful! We want it all." So it got quiet, and I just said, "Gonzo," and his head popped off. He was so happy. He almost dropped, what he had in his hands. He looked around the room like, did you hear that? So maybe that's a mini example of me being a plurilingual.
Exactly. Yes, it is, and it's fascinating, because I feel like everyone, especially in Italy, we are so proud. Even ciao makes the whole, makes our day, and it was very plurilingual of you to say ganzo, which is not even standard Italian. I would say that it's really Tuscany. It's a very Tuscan way of describing. So yeah, congratulations. It was plurilingual.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us about plurilingualism. We've learned so much about how shifting our mindset about our various competencies across languages can help motivate us to learn more languages, and motivate our students, as well as bridge cultural differences and allow us lots of communicative opportunities that we might otherwise not have. So thank you so much. And we look forward to talking with you in the next session about intercomprehension.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is Jen and Rob. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.